approach. We'll then have a look at organisations and also where HR can be very supportive in that space. And then we're going to actually look specifically at you and your role and your career and think about how selling may apply there. So as your tour guide, let's go to our very first slide. I need to give you some orientation tools so that these are things you can take with you on today's journey, but also beyond today. So the very first one I want to address is everybody lives by selling something. Now, I know that selling has often a very negative reputation in the marketplace, but I want us to think about selling more as a life skill, something that everyone can actually benefit from. And just remembering that it's your intention that affects whether selling is helpful or not to you and to other people. And this phrase, everybody lives by selling something, was actually coined by Robert Louis Stevenson, who was an author, poet, raconteur, lived in the latter part of the 1800s, and he's kind of Barrett's patron saint. But he actually really looked at humans when he got to travel a lot in his lifetime, which was often very difficult to do so back in the late 1800s. And he really saw that if anyone was trying to exchange an idea with someone else or trading something or whatever it might be, that at the end of the day, they were trying to sell something. So it's quite interesting when my eldest son, Josh, who's now 21, was 11, said to me, "Mum, I don't believe everybody lives by selling something." And I said to him, "Well, that's very interesting. Why do you say that?" And then he tried to persuade and convince me why this wasn't true. And so I said to him, "I suspect by the very nature of you trying to persuade and convince me, aren't you trying to sell me something?" And he went, "I get it, Mum." So if I can ask everyone to think about what does selling actually do for us? Well, it's the vehicle that allows opportunity to flourish and people to prosper. If you've got an idea or an initiative, if you want to actually get other people to buy into it, the first thing you have to do is stop them doing what they're doing now, have them pay attention to you, and then consider whether or not they want to talk to you further about this initiative. Now, I can't think of any role or any person that's never had to do that on a professional or personal level. So if you can at least bear with me for the purposes of this exercise today, just to factor in selling as a vehicle that actually allows opportunity to flourish and people to prosper, that will probably help us in our journey today. The second orientation tool I want you to take with you is the 3 questions. Now, as HR professionals, you've probably seen these things when it comes to coaching and those sorts of things. And they're very good questions because we need to always think about what can we control and what can we influence and also what's outside of our control. Because when we're trying to influence and persuade people, we're trying to look at bringing about better outcomes and so on, it's really the first 2 that we can manage. We have to be aware of the ones outside of our control, but it's how we operate and adapt in that. So when I come to talk about selling, we're going to talk about adaptive systems as well, not a linear process. The next orientation tool is about perspective and being otherish. Oftentimes we see a lot of people, and they don't have to be salespeople, with their ideas, get so excited by them that they go and talk to the people they want to persuade and convince, but forget about the other person's perspective. They forget to orient information in a way that the other might understand. And so therefore we often get a lot of miscommunication occurring. So this is not just something salespeople struggle with, it's what human beings often struggle with. I was asked a question the other day about how to deal with difficult people. And I said, well, before you label them difficult, just work out, are they different first? Because if they're just different, then it's your job, if you want to engage them, to find out where they're coming from first, then see if you can find common ground for the common good as we work together. And there's a really interesting concept you might like to look up called otherish. And it's just really when you're thinking about doing what you're doing, do you have others in mind as well? So you're thinking in that more holistic approach about not just what I want to achieve, but how do we all get together? And I'll explain more of this as we go through. And my final orientation tool is to really get us to think about purpose. So what are we ultimately trying to achieve as an organisation, as teams, as individuals? What's the overarching purpose that we're lining up behind to take to market? And to really think about our world in terms of systems rather than silver bullets or reductionist approach. There's a lot of silver bullets, a lot of things out there that you get flooded with every day, no doubt. But none of them are really useful unless they're actually part of an integrated system. So perhaps if I just give you a brief introduction about where my thinking comes from with all of this and the 25 years or so we've been working in this space, it's that I'm really, whilst I have a science degree from Monash University in medical science subjects, when I was 16, my parents actually got me to do a whole range of psychometric assessments and interviews with Chan McLeod and to help with my career direction. And that was a very interesting exercise. A lot of the people that gave me feedback said that she could probably do a range of things, but probably would be a good architect or engineer. But back then, there weren't many role models for young girls around that space, and I just couldn't see myself being one of those. So I ended up pursuing science, and then by default, kind of fell into this space of selling. But what is really bizarre is that I've actually turned into an unofficial systems engineer, a human systems engineer, if you like, specializing in the area of sales. And I've also turned into a behavioral scientist. So I kind of go macro and micro, and I like to look at how all of these things click together. Because unfortunately, the world of selling is littered with a lot of training event style approaches, or CRM will solve this, and it's kind of lots of stuff thrown at people rather than looking at an integrated system. So I'm going to share some of this thinking with you. Like I said, it's up to you what you want to take away with you, but hopefully it will help you step back, look at your businesses, and think about how it is that we sell around here and how we actually engage customers and how we continue to engage customers and employees and everyone else to boot. So they're the orientation tools I'd like you to keep in mind as we go on our journey. So let's now go to our first major section, which is the future of business is human-centered and sales-oriented. So this is where I'd like to sort of provide you with some foundation platforms that you can think about, concepts you can take on board to start to look at the orientation for yourselves as individuals, but also the communities that you interact with, the cultures that you help create and cultivate and good stewards for. So let's start off with this picture here. Now, I can't ask you directly, but if I was to ask you to describe this picture in a word or two, chances are, if you're like any of the other groups we've ever asked, you probably come up with words like curious, inquisitive, focused, learning, um, cute. These are the sorts of words that we get time and time again when I show people this picture. So I want you to think about that, and I'll explain why I'm going in this direction in a moment. I would then ask you, how old do you think this little girl is? And we typically get that she's between 3 and 6 years of age. I then would ask you a question about children of this age. Do they like to ask lots of questions? And if any of you are around children of this age at the moment or have been, you know that they are incessantly asking questions. In fact, what's really important here from a biological perspective is that human beings, by and large, there's obviously the exception here or there, are actually born curious. And it's in our nature to want to inquire and discover and learn and grow. The second question I would ask you about these little children is, do they like to be helpful? Now, I don't mean they actually are, but of course, they actually like to help you. They want to help you vacuum or put the dishes in the dishwasher or help you hang out the clothes or cook and those sorts of things. Because this is where children, particularly between 0 and 6, really want to learn how to do it themselves. Maria Montessori, I'm a Montessori parent. Maria Montessori writes really beautifully about this sort of stuff, the absorbent mind and the applied mind. So this is their natural state. And the third question actually about children like this is that if you promise them something, will they hunt you down until you cough up whatever you've promised them? Well, if any of you know them, absolutely. They are relentless. But here's the other interesting thing about humans. We're actually born for fairness. So if you think about this and you think about being curious, being helpful and fair, that is our natural state as humans. So where does that go? What happens to that? Because all the work we've done around really great salespeople is that they've never lost their inner 6-year-old. Yes, they're probably a slightly more professional version, one would hope, but this is the qualities that they actually bring to the fore, and this is what clients absolutely love. So we want to cultivate these qualities, and it's not that stereotypical kind of, ripping you off thing, which I'll talk about in a moment as well. This is a natural state of humans, and it's also the best qualities that we want to cultivate in our sales and customer service cultures, and quite frankly, in everyone. The other thing that's important to note is because we're also pro-social and we live in groups, the thing is that biology threw a bit of a spanner in the works. As we actually get a little bit older, we work out that if we're going to actually get on with the tribe that we're in, we kind of have to sometimes pull our head in, unlike a 6-year-old who just is kind of straight out there and tells you like it is. So what we end up doing is we might not say what we really think, or we may not want to interrupt someone, or we may not want to come across as too rude or pushy, which is things we hear people say about salespeople. But here's the thing, you know, to be a good salesperson, you have to go and meet strangers and you have to ignite conversations. You have to actually get them to stop what they're doing now and engage with you. And that actually takes really masterful communication skills and capabilities and insight and awareness about others. So back in tribal days, this is why most people hate selling. They don't understand why they hate it, but most people hate it for this reason. Back in the tribal days, biology wanted to, it wants to keep you alive. So what it did is it actually threw in this biological construct that if you ever got told off, you were probably pulled in front of the crowd and you were told off and they don't want you to do that again. So not just psychologically, intellectually, you go, I'm not doing that again. But biology didn't want you to die, because if you did something really bad, you'd be ejected from the tribe, and that would actually be a death sentence. So what biology did was actually accompany a physical pain. And there's a lot of research around this now, that the fear of rejection is actually real. So human beings want to get along with each other. They don't want to be ejected from the tribe. They want to stay safe. And so I am not going to go and actually annoy you or speak up to you or interrupt you. And so now you've got this conundrum where you've got this wonderful 6-year-old that just wants to get out there and do all the things we've been talking about earlier. But then they go, oh, yes, but what if? So how do we help people become more masterful at being able to interrupt people, in inverted commas, in a really constructive, positive way, to introduce them to new ideas and concepts that might actually be helpful to them? Well, this is where we need to learn the mastery of sales and the skills and capabilities and knowledge and insights and mindsets that go with that. But you can see why it can be quite challenging for most people, because the fear of being rejected from the tribe is actually often greater than that actual inner 6-year-old, desire to get out and explore the world and help people and work for fairness. So welcome to my world of helping people reorient and reacquaint themselves with the inner 6-year-old, but in a much more professional way that actually yields positive results for everyone concerned. So keep that as a base. Now let's go on to the next stage. Yes, the word selling has a very bad reputation because unfortunately most news stories you ever read or see or hear about are negative, and they're usually described like this. So I often joke that Barrett's like the antidote to what happened at the Banking Royal Commission. Because here's the thing, I was interviewed recently by Alan Kohler, and he basically asked me about the Banking Royal Commission, and he started talking about selling being the issue. And I had to pull him up, and I said, actually, Alan, it's not the function of selling that's the problem. It's the intention of those people and what they wanted to do to their customers. That's the problem. Selling shouldn't be blamed. Selling is just the vehicle that gets you in front of people to actually have a discussion. If it's you actually then wanting to rip someone off, screw them over or whatever, it's not selling's fault. It's your intention about what you chose to do with that process. So this is where I want people to stop looking at this end of the spectrum and thinking that's what salespeople are like, because it's not. We also then have a bunch of people who actually don't understand selling. They're not in selling, and so therefore they can be ignorant about it, ill-informed or irritated by it, and then often revert to the other end of the spectrum here, where the devious, the dubious, and the desperate are, and actually create negative stereotypes. But what good selling actually is this. It's commercial, collaborative, client-centric, proactive. I've got a whole lot of elements I'll show you later, but this is what we're looking at here, and this is what good organisations and cultures really cultivate, not just in salespeople, but across the teams and the culture of the business. So my mission in life and my team's mission is to actually spread the green zone and eliminate the ignorance and the ill-informed and the irritated, so that everybody actually lives by selling something and actually supports the sales process. Now, some of these devious and dubious characters, they're wired that way, so we can't change them. Just keep an eye on them though, because you don't really want them in your teams. And unfortunately, some of them are running companies and countries at the moment as well. So we just have to be mindful about that. But you can see where I'm coming from. Selling actually is a really important function for everyone, and it's something we can do honourably and well. A couple of other things, given my scientific nerdy nature, I'd like us to make sure that everyone understands the differences between selling, marketing and networking. What I don't like is when people call selling marketing. It's not. Marketing talks to groups, sales talks to individuals, and we must have them working together. And then, of course, networking is the third element. So if we all know what they are and how to make them work and operate together in concert and know when to use them, then we'll actually get much better execution of our sales, marketing and networking activities when it comes to engaging others and having them think about buying into our proposition as an organisation. So let's have a think about our clients and what they want and need. Well, we have to listen to them first. And I'm just sharing with you some insights from other businesses and work we've done over the years. You'll see them flashing up on the screen, which is just showing people what we're finding generally is what clients are actually looking for. And again, I'm not necessarily talking about simple transactions, but even then, a lot of clients are very interested in this as well. But if you're in B2B sales, this is what we're seeing. And it's fascinating too, given the current state of the world, and particularly with the trust deficit, that there are 5 elements particularly that are actually pulsating very red hot at the moment. And the first one here is to feel safe. A lot of people are rather anxious. So we're finding that if we're going to help our clients stay engaged with us and work with us, one of the things we need to make sure we're doing is help them feel safe. The other one too, of course, is to keep them out of trouble and preserve their reputation. So again, as we know how social media can destroy a person or a company's reputation overnight, we want to make sure that this is, we look after this from a client's perspective. We also want to make sure that we're consistent, because what people don't like is inconsistency and wishy-washy stuff, and you're all over the place and you change your message one day and it becomes something like, well, what the hell are you doing? Who are you? I need to know what you stand for, and so on. And the behaviours need to be consistent as well. We also know that whilst in the past, salespeople were often like the Wikipedia of information, but in fact, the really good salespeople now are information sorters and sifters. There's so much stuff out there. There's a lot of crap. There's good stuff, but how do I get to it? How do I find it as a customer? Well, our businesses and our sales teams and everyone else should be helping people sift and sort it to get to the nuggets that are important to them. And ultimately, whilst I know people think about Net Promoter Score, I have a few issues with Net Promoter Score. How do we make our clients' lives as easy as possible? I don't mean the way what they do is easy or what we do is easy, but how do we make it easy for them to engage and interact with us? So a lot of processes make life really difficult for people to connect with. And I'm sure you as HR know that this is not just with a client's perspective, but internally as well. So let's think about how we make things easier, not simplistic, but easier. So these are just some things that might help you. Here's a couple of comparison charts. So what we're looking at is in the 20th century, these are the elements that we have seen were okay, you could do business like this in the 20th century, but we're actually seeing a lot of this stuff now really shifting across to the 21st century, where you can see the comparisons there. And some of the key things that are really standing out now, and Harvard's talking about it too, and when they start talking about it, you know it's getting to the mainstream, is that this profit maximization and shareholder return, particularly, is actually on the way out as the only reason to run a business. So we're getting much more human-centered. We're getting much more about triple bottom line. We're getting much more about, people, profit and planet. We're also seeing that competitive short-termism of a lot of companies is now shifting to collaborative and long-term. So and you can see here why humans are really essential to help build out these sort of relationships. And we're also seeing too a lot of the elements like moving from a consumerist society to a renewable and sustainable society. The genie's out of the bottle now. This is becoming mainstream, and this is where value resides. That 20th century model, very small margins, if any, high volume, high turnover, that kind of stuff. But what you want here is actually, if you want margins in business and you want to run a viable, sustainable business, this is what we're looking at here from a 21st century model. And I think it's worth noting that whether it's salespeople or not, we're moving from management and then the celebrity CEOs to the servant leadership and stewardship. So we really do need an extreme makeover at the top for a lot of companies in terms of their boards and senior leadership teams, because at the moment we haven't got what I would consider 21st century leadership capabilities that know how to really run and operate businesses and create good community and work collaboratively. So we are at a real state of flux at the moment, but hopefully this list here will help you have a look at where businesses are shifting to, at least the ones that are actually wanting to be there for the longer term, and it's just helping us understand those things. So if you have any questions about these elements, we'll have a question section in a moment. So we're moving from selling products and linear transactions to solution selling and multifaceted solutions. So this is why we need humans involved. This is why we need them to be able to sort out these sorts of issues. The other thing, just to keep, I won't go into detail, is a lot of remuneration structures for sales teams really stuck in that 20th century linear, and they do not work for these multifaceted solution-oriented approaches. So there's a lot of rethinking around remuneration packages and those sorts of elements for sales teams. And it's about time, because most of those commission-oriented, transactional sales remuneration structures do not work for a 21st century world. So it brings me to AI. And of course, it's the buzz. And, AI sounds terribly, amazing and sexy and whatever. Some of it's pretty basic and structured. It's just automating, sort of routine activities called robot processing automation. And then, of course, people often think of robots, but that's not necessarily what AI is about either. So here's what I want you to think about. There will be elements, as you well know, in your organizations that can be automated and take out a lot of that routine work and also error-prone work, because it just becomes boring for some people to do this. But a lot of people think, oh, it's AI or humans. Well, the interesting research is showing that, in fact, the qualities and capabilities we really need to cultivate and develop in the 21st century are the very things I've been talking about those inner six-year-olds have, these areas of human communication, effective selling skills, actually handling complex relationships, and so on and so forth. And that's an area so worthy of study, but it's very poorly understood. And that's why we've been working on this for the last 25 years. And I've come up with what I call the holy trinity of selling. And I suppose it could be the holy trinity of relationships if you want to take it more broadly. And that is about how well we actually can identify opportunity, how we can work collaboratively to then actually come up with great solutions that actually keep moving us forward. So I don't see AI being in competition with this. I see us actually creating a combination of things. And AI, and human-centered approach is where we need to take the future. And this will affect how you recruit people, what you're looking for in terms of capabilities, and so on and so forth. So I just thought I might share that with you. So here's some other things too. I won't go into detail, but there's some links you can look at later, because business is now looking at being a force for good. And whilst we're in a tussle with some of these, old kind of business models and, profit maximization and so on, it's moving ahead. And just like renewable energy and all that kind of stuff, this is where it's going. So there's some very interesting articles. I mean, this is just a very small selection I've pulled out for you. But what's really interesting is McKinsey's been writing about the economic impact of short-termism, which is actually debunking the effectiveness of profit maximization and shareholder return as the only measures of success in business. Also, too, Harvard is calling out businesses that are like greenwashing in the early things are actually truth washing. So, businesses like Philip Morris who pretend that they're actually doing good for people, but if you put them up against the United Nations Sustainability Development Goals, there's no way they could be doing good for people because they do not meet certain goals given what they sell. So there's really interesting stuff happening here around people being called out for their ethics and their standards and their morals. And customers are watching, and employees are watching, and particularly the younger generation are watching. And we know that by mid-2020s that a lot of our workforce will be millennials, and they're watching. So we're on notice. The other thing is too, there was an interesting article I found the other day, because oftentimes sales cultures are seen as these blokey, boozy, kind of hyper-competitive cultures. And yes, some of them still are, and some of them were a lot were like that in the 20th century. But most of the best salespeople out there, believe it or not, are actually women, and they hate that kind of culture. So this article is very interesting about what organizations are promoting, not just for sales cultures, but also for business cultures. If we're promoting, those sort of very hyper masculine, boozy kind of hyper competitive cultures, women aren't interested. So it's quite fascinating where that's going. If you want to look at a fantastic not-for-profit organisation that's really looking at business as a force for good, I'd recommend you look up Blueprint for Better Business. We're in contact with them now, particularly around our Selling Better concepts that we've got, but they are definitely helping businesses transition to businesses as a force for good. Also, you've probably heard of B corporations. That's an accreditation process that you have to go that's very rigorous. We're in the throes of getting ourselves B Corped, and also too, we're measuring up our business against the United Nations Sustainability Development Goals. So they're great ways to go and have a look at what we need to map for the future in terms of if we want to be these businesses for good. There's a great website about different economic models, which I think is important for HR to understand. You've got to be good business people as well. So this is giving up some very interesting models, as well as Donut Economics by Kate Raworth. Honestly, I could have had about 25 pages of lists like this, but I thought at least this is a start for you to keep your mind open, if not already, to look at these sorts of changes, because they're here and they're moving forward, and they affect how we do business, how we sell, how we attract and retain customers and staff, suppliers, communities, and so on. So that brings me to what we've been building over the last few years and launched in late 2017, which is the case for selling better. So if you're interested, you don't have to take this up, but if you're interested, we've actually built out an ethical human-centered sales philosophy that you can get at sellingbetter.com. And we've also built out an adaptive sales strategy and operating system, including learning capabilities, etc., that really help people develop selling better cultures. Because selling better is about being ethical, and it's also about being adaptive. That's how you look at how we continue to evolve and flourish. So that's just there for your future reference. So now we're at the first section for questions, and hopefully I've still got some time to show you some of the other bits. So Alan, have we got some questions from the group?
Nothing just yet. I will just open up the Q&A section there, and I'll have a quick look in there for you. So anybody, any questions, please feel free to just put them in the chat section or in the Q&A section. Nothing coming through just yet.
That's okay. Well, what we can do is we can keep going, and I can show people now some more practical things. But as you can see, laying out the foundations like this, it's important to factor in that there's a range of things we have to consider as we move forward. So we'll have time at the end as well. So if people are wanting specific answers to specific questions, just let me know. Some will be able to answer today, maybe others will take offline.
Okay, no problem.
Brilliant. All right, let's carry on then. Okay, so now let's get practical. So how does HR help businesses sell better and improve sales operations and salespeople performance? So again, it's all about perspective and perceptions. If you hold a negative view of selling, and I'm afraid to tell you this, but I've met a lot of HR people that do, that will not help you. You need to get on board and think about what is good sales about, how do I help people sell better, and so on and so forth. But I've had people tell me that they won't let sales managers hire certain salespeople because they're too sales focused. I've actually had that happen in the past, and I don't know how to respond to that other than the person clearly does not understand what good selling is about. And the reason why they thought they were too sales focused is because they were too proactive and assertive, which is exactly what we're looking for. So again, what's your perspectives and perceptions about what good looks like, and come back and looking at what does the job require, what kind of humans do we need to have in place to deliver those roles. So here are the biggest issues that are facing CEOs and sales leaders today. I don't know if they're going to be relevant to your organizations, but tell me if any of these things may be relevant perhaps down the track. So one of the things that they're struggling with, and a lot of businesses do sales strategy very badly. In fact, they don't do it at all. They just usually say, go and sell more. And if they change anything, it's either the REM structure or the Salesforce structure. That's not strategy. So strategy is where you're aiming for. It's your navigational system. You've got to know who you want to be talking to, what do you want to talk to them about, and what is it, and how are we going to get there and engage them, and so on, and how are we going to give ourselves a sustainable competitive advantage now and in the future. The other area is how to build actually business cultures and reputations that are underpinned by trust, committed engagement, purpose and high performance with employees, clients and suppliers. This trust deficit is creating a lot of anxiety for businesses, and particularly they've been very transactional. So we're seeing people, voting or buying or walking with their, with their wallets and feet in terms of who they want to engage with, because there's a lot of choice. The other area too is how to actually build in sales systems and develop sales mastery and minimize sales execution and operational risk, because a lot of people are very poor, or businesses are very poor at actually creating these areas. So selling, ironically, even though it's ubiquitous and it's important to drive opportunity and revenue and everything for business, is the least, it's very poorly understood. And people just don't know how to grapple with it, and that's why they get stuck in silver bullet solutions. So let's have a quick look then where sales sits in the value chain. You'll notice here that we have the revenue generating line, and then we have the revenue absorbing line. So from an HR perspective, you're costing the business money. So how are you going to help it make money? How are you going to work with these revenue generating lines so that they run really well, got the right people in there, actually upholding the culture and so on and so forth, to really let that business flourish and grow? So I'll leave that with you. And here's just a couple of items to factor in. So organisations are transitioning to being proactive client-facing, sales-led organisations. So not just customer-centric, because that's often a token gesture, but selling is kind of the epicenter now of how everyone revolves around how we're actually going to engage and keep engaging, re-engaging with our clients to keep moving forward. We know that business strategy is derived from the value chain, and nothing happens until something gets sold, and sales strategy makes sales happen. And in any of the value chain areas lies a competitive advantage, but without a healthy sales operating system, we have no business. And sales and marketing are core parts of the value chain. They must actually work together. So with your value chain operating effectively, you will actually increase your competitiveness, reduce costs, improve revenue, and improve market share. So I'm proposing this. At the end of the day, you don't have to accept this. You can have a ritual burning later if you like with whatever I share with you. But I am showing you what the smart businesses are now doing, that sales is the epicenter of their organization and everyone works together, which is why selling is everybody's business. So now let's get down to some of the key things. And apologies if I offend anyone, but I want HR and L&D to have a look at these things, because oftentimes with the best of intentions, they go out to try and help their sales teams flourish. But unfortunately, your sales teams and leaders aren't necessarily as well informed as you would like, and they often ask for training as the solution to their sales issue. So I want us to say a big no to these things. So I want us to say no to seeing training as the only solution to fixing sales performance issues. I want us to say no to event-style training and rah-rah personality-driven pep talks. And I want us to say no to silver bullets that promise everything and deliver no real change. CRM is important, but it will not save your sales force if there's nothing else to support it, for example. But I want you to say a big yes to selling as a complex variable system that's engineered for growth. And I'm going to show you a complex variable system. But firstly, I want to show you this. This is what sales management used to look like in the 20th century. It certainly had a few plates wobbling and the sales managers would be ducking here and there, but they could kind of almost manage it. But with the world as it is now, it's much more complex. This is what sales leadership and sales operations look like, intersecting with marketing, intersecting with the supply chain, all sorts of things. It really is overwhelming. So how do we get our head around these things and actually be able to prioritize what's actually going on? Because it's not just one thing. So I want us to think first about creating a culture that is systems approach oriented and also we focused. If you look at your cultures, you can actually start to map on these cultures. Start to map your culture onto this map. The ideal selling better culture has quadrant 4 characteristics. Now, it's more than that, but for the purposes of our exercise today, this starts to give you things to look at and see, are they in place? when we ask customers where they think their organisations are, a lot of them, at least the ones we work with, are often in quadrant 2. They're nice people, but they haven't got a system. But then oftentimes they'll say, we have people all over the place. Now that's a problem. What we want is everyone to be operating in a coordinated manner. So I'm just leaving this with you as a guide to think about how do we create customer-centric, selling better cultures. So let's look at strategy, okay? Because strategy is really important. It's your navigational system. And if you don't know where you're going, every road will lead you nowhere. So you often get random acts of sales if you don't have a good sales strategy in place. So the question we have to answer first is, why should we choose you? You know, why should people choose to buy from your organisation? Why should they choose to, you know, work for your organisation? So you've got to have these sorts of ideas in place. So we've got to understand the difference between a business strategy and a sales strategy. A business strategy is a long-term plan, whether it's 3, 5, 10 plus years into the future. But getting there often looks like this. It's like sailing. We've got to tack our way there. It's not a straight line. So sales strategies are by their nature shorter in lifespan. They're around 18 to 24 months, which is why they must be looked at regularly and adapted. So you might get requests from sales teams and leaders. I need a different kind of salesperson. I need something here. You've got to be aware of what we're trying to do is navigate our way towards a better future. And that means we have to be adaptive and think about how we're going to move forward. So here's the spinning plates. Here's the strategy and operating model I want you to have a look at. We've actually built this model, and we've actually found it helps people organize their thinking around all the various elements that they need to factor in when it comes to running a great sales strategy and operations framework. And you'll notice here that there's a number of elements that you would get involved with as HR, but you also need to have your head around it as well. I'll show a case study afterwards how this really helps people make better decisions. But these are a number of elements here that actually factor in. But most people only ever think about sales training, which would be done in the Salesforce development area, to fix a sales issue. But you can see here there's so many elements that we have to account for, which is what we can do. So we do a lot of audits. So here's a study we did back over a 2-year period with about 25 organisations, large, public, listed, private, some not-for-profit, and so on. And the average, this is a percentage score. So what you'll notice when we actually added up everyone's initial audits, their scores are pretty average. So no one was outstanding in terms of their results overall. Some were in certain areas, but not overall. And what we found most of the pinch points were across these different businesses was they were very poor at actually defining their market segments and having clear value propositions that really helped them navigate their way forward. They also had really, haphazard sales development, often just event style training. No really good sales processes in place, poor pipeline management, and also metrics. Now, people are obsessed with metrics, but it's the input measures you have to measure to give you the outputs. But anyway, these are some of the things that happen. Out of all of your strategy will tell you what type of Salesforce structure you need. So when you're working with businesses, you've got to work out what are they actually selling, because not every salesperson is built the same. And not every sales channel is built the same. And we may use automation in some of them if it's off-the-shelf stuff. So whether we're call center operators, and this is the other thing we're actually seeing, by the way, is that generalist sales rep is disappearing. And what we are seeing is really, if we're going to have field people, they're highly skillful and they're highly developed and consultative in their way. They're domain experts. They also could be scientists, engineers, technicians, mathematicians, etc. They've got very good EQ and IQ in terms of handling stuff. But now we're seeing also that the telephone sales cohort is really not just that nicey nice customer service, take an order type thing, that the good teams are actually realizing that having smart people who can deal with complexity and also work in concert with these other people in the field, but work over the phone, working in a coordinated, team-oriented way with their clients. So we're seeing selling becoming a team sport, not just a salesperson's job. So that's something to factor in as well. So let's think process. We've also got to make sure that we do not create linear, restrictive, prescriptive sales processes. People want agency. They hate being stuck on a train track. And unfortunately, I've heard too many call centre environments be like this, and it doesn't work, and it's very, very boring for people as well, customers and salespeople alike. What we want to say yes to is clear roadmaps, individual accountabilities, and safe boundaries. So you need to know what track you're racing on. You need to have agency. People need to be able to, be in control of what they're doing to help them actually move forward, and they can actually come back and not be micromanaged and so on and so forth. This is just a very kind of loose example of a sales process map. A lot of people get fixated on the actual client interaction, but forget all the other steps before and after. So building out a sales process map, which you can use for induction, training, coaching, assessment, and so on. Because unfortunately, most people learn selling by default, not design. So how do we actually make that much easier for everyone to work on? The other thing is sales management. This is the worst trained area of all. Most companies make the mistake of putting their best salesperson into a sales manager's role, and that is usually a fatal mistake. Selling and managing are two different things. The best sales managers are very analytical but also care about people, which is a really interesting job, and they're also able to handle a range of variables. They're not the super salesperson with the cape coming out the back. So these are just some of the elements that sales leadership need to master and need to develop. And I think, you'll see here that it's quite a complex role, but it's extremely poorly trained. So when we start to educate sales management, they really do start to find that actually this job is a little bit more than they thought, but when they master it, good things really start to happen. So just thought I'd leave that with you. When we think about people, we've got to think about, as I said before, the types of athletes we want to take on board, particularly in the sales function. We've also got to think about what we're going to measure. A lot of people get fixated on these output results, but that's just a history lesson. What we want to do is look at what are the activities they need to do and the competencies they need to have to do those activities. So we built the world's first sales competency dictionary. So we actually map a lot of these things out. So then people can actually see what that looks like and how they can apply it and how they can develop mastery. So that's just something to factor in there. The other thing is we need to stop this. I mentioned about this training issue before, but this doesn't change anything and it's a waste of money. There's a lot of stuff we can do now that makes learning and education in bite-sized chunks are much more interesting, but this has got to stop because it doesn't work. So we want to help businesses and organisations, and I'm encouraging HR and L&D to think about creating perpetual learning environments that actually do deliver an ROI, not event-based stuff or just self-help. You've got to have a support system in place to help people develop their capabilities. And so we probably all know the 70-20-10 model. So if we're going to do 10, we want to make sure that whatever classroom work we're doing is part of an integrated process. If it's a conference, it's actually connected to has a beginning, a middle, and an ongoing journey. We want to make sure that it's cost effective and purposely driven, particularly using inquiry-based learning approaches, none of this lecturing and talking at people. We also want to make sure that our sales leaders are really equipped to be masterful coaches and that even our peers can help coach each other. So this is where we do a lot of work in helping create these sorts of environments, and it really pays dividends because the sales excellence managers, no disrespect to them, they should not be in place of sales leadership and management. The managers are the epicenter of evolution of their teams. That's just where they belong and what they should be doing. And of course, we want to create independent, self-directed learners and giving them snacks and information and ideas and things that they can carry on. So it's not surprising that a lot of work now that we're finding we're doing is providing online curriculum to help people, but it's in an integrated approach where everyone works together, but we have curriculum that's online, it supports their learning, they can dip in and out of it, and it actually gets people moving in a much better way and actually developing their mastery. So regardless of what you use or what you're doing, and regardless of the topic, quite frankly, this is what we're encouraging and what we're seeing being encouraged, as you know, happening in organisations. But seriously, getting sales managers to adopt this can be a bit of a chore sometimes. So if you're struggling with it, don't worry, so are we, but we will get them there in the end. Culture, let's just tidy this up here. Ultimately, what you're trying to do is bring about this. clarity, consistency, and communication, which of course delivers this. So we need a system to be able to help summarize, pull all of this together so that everyone knows what they're doing, for what purpose, and can actually move together in a really functioning, high functioning manner, and actually create results and have fun. So this is what we're talking about with Selling Better and the 3 Cs. So here's a quick case study for you. Let's have a look. These are the results of an audit. Remember the model I showed you earlier? And you'll notice here that they've got a lot of challenges. So this audit was rather problematic, but it wasn't anything they didn't know. But it actually put it out in the open. And as a really good ELT team, we were able to really work together, both not just the sales directors, but the CEO, HR, finance, operations. We all worked together on this to coordinate a plan that would actually help this business sell better. And that's why I encourage senior leaders to be part of anything like this, because it's a very insightful and illuminating education for them about how they support the business. The interesting thing about this assessment and this audit and this whole project was that they were a bit concerned about the back office not being very functional, but this absolutely pointed out back office was not helping sales at all. Sales needed work, but the back office, even if they sold good stuff in, the back office wasn't helping them actually get it back out again. So this actually created a company-wide transformation program, and it really has paid dividends, which I'll show you in a moment. So what they developed out of the audit was all of these things here. So their strategy, sales messaging, value proposition, they branded the project internally so it actually had some currency, built best practice for sales and sales leadership, tools and standards, job descriptions, job frameworks, KPIs, learning and development plan, sales management and coaching, support system, development program, and of course building out a library, a sales library for people to go and access all of this wonderful stuff that everyone was contributing and building. And so what happened, then we built out a little project timeline to roll it out over time, which you can see here, a few things need to happen. But in my world, most people ring up for training. But if you don't have a strategy and so on and so forth, you can see the training would be useless. So set it up properly. The other thing that was interesting out of this project was that at their senior leadership meetings and board meetings, they made sure there was always a vacant chair for the customer. So they always would ask, any decisions they made, how does this affect the customer? And I think that's a really smart thing, because it makes it very clear that we're not just here for ourselves, we're here for them. But I'm going to propose 2 other things. What about suppliers? And what about the community and the environment? Let's actually have 3 chairs that actually allow us to ask questions about the impact of our decisions and efforts on those areas. And I'd be quite surprised, but we're pleasantly surprised, if I would say, about the changes that might just happen in terms of the decisions you make as an organisation moving forward, and the decisions I suspect would be for the better. So that's just something for you to think about. So here are the results. We did an audit. After the training was rolled out, 8 months later, we asked the sales team to do a mini audit on this model. And you can see here there's quite a distinct difference in the areas that we audited, in terms of, anywhere from about 15 to 20 points difference in terms of a lift in performance, which is great. Strategy, value proposition, processes, pipeline, Salesforce development, etc., and so forth. And so that all looks nice, but did it actually make us money? Well, yes, it did. So they had 130% of their sales budget year to date. They overshot the runway. They were able to actually get business confirmed in the sales pipeline out to 24 weeks versus 14 weeks. And so on it went. We found that they were actually able to get people aligned to better opportunities. Sales team were finding better, larger opportunities to win, better customer retention. Their value proposition was adopted by the whole business. Their net promoter score increased significantly. They had a lot of coaching happening now across the business. The sales processes were adopted not just by the sales team, but across the business, and had a shared common language, better career paths, and the CEO fully endorsed it. And there were then 4 company-wide projects, of which this was one, that led to huge changes and positive outcomes for the organisation. So it's just an example of many that we have, but I thought it at least showed you practically what actually happens. So I've got these questions here, but I'm thinking time-wise, Alan, if I just go through to the end, we might then collect them then. Is that okay with you?
All good, yeah. No problem, Sue. Thank you.
All right, great. So now we're coming to the inner salesperson for HR people. Let's have a look at that. My question to you all is, how do you want to be seen, perceived, and valued? Because here it is. Your personal brand is what other people say about you when you leave the room, and it's your professional reputation. So what is it that you're doing to be remembered for all the right reasons? So I want you to think about your career, your role, your function in the business, and think for a moment, where are you missing opportunities by not even showing up, by not even talking to the people that need to know about you and asking the questions? Because if you don't show up, they don't know you. The second thing is, when you are showing up, how are you executing that? How well is that happening for you? And so it's again thinking about what you can control and influence, and what kind of questions you could ask, and how you perceive and understand their situation. And again, there's a lot more to it, but at least start thinking about those elements for yourself. Because here's the brutal facts. There's over 60 years of empirical research into sales effectiveness, but it's not just salespeople, it's anyone in their career. And we found that the people who are not hesitant are 5 times more productive than their hesitant colleagues. So it's about getting out there, and it's about, picking up an opportunity, and it's about seeing what's possible. And again, remember, you're in a 6-year-old, they love to do this, but that fear of rejection might just be holding you back. So ask yourself, what's the worst that could happen if I just went up and asked someone something, hopefully in a reasonably polite manner? They can say no. Okay, they said no. Try again, or try a different way, but don't not ask. Because if you never ask, the answer's always no. And I don't like living life like that. So if I can encourage you to at least be proactive and find out what's going on, that may just be something that you might find quite interesting. I come back to this. These are the Holy Trinity. This is the Holy Trinity of selling. It's actually the Holy Trinity of communication. It's the Holy Trinity of actually building relationships. If you keep thinking about these 3 key concepts in mind, it will really help you navigate your way well from internally and externally when it comes to selling yourself better. So these are some questions for you. What do HR have to do to position yourselves as true consultants and supporters of your business, your clients in your business, to truly understand all the variables that your business has and how you can support them now and into the future? To bring the conversation up to that consultative level, talking about, their business and looking at all the available opportunities, and also thinking, how do we as HR get to this standard of operating? So there's maybe some really nice lessons from the great salespeople that you could learn, if you're not doing them already, of course, that is the case. So if you remember our little girl at the beginning, this is what she develops into when she's really cultivating all of the qualities we've been talking about. And you can see here that any person worth their weight who wants to be effective and useful, you can see our assets register is rather full. And look, this is what is part of my remit. Am I good at every one of them? No, but I'm a continual work in progress. But if I think about HR, I think about my role, I think about really good salespeople and so on, who are there to help facilitate change. This is our Lego box of assets. These are the things we really need to cultivate. And that's what good selling also has going for it as well. So that gives you an overview. I'm happy to take questions, and I thought there were some actions if you wanted to take. Certainly, I would encourage you to proudly embrace your inner salesperson and human systems thinking, and get to know your business from a sales perspective. And if we can be of any help, there are some links and things here that you can, welcome to reach out to us on. So that's that. So, oh my God, we've got about 7-8 minutes, I think, Alan, for questions. And I told you it was a bit of a worldwide tour. So the tour's come to a stop. Bit of a Kon-Tiki tour, really, isn't it? So I'm just kind of interested if anyone has any questions, and happy to answer them. And hopefully it's been worthwhile.
I'll just wait there and just see if anyone pops any questions in. Nothing just at the moment. I think as well what we'll do, oh, here we have somebody. So Ellen just said, thanks very much for sharing. Thank you, Ellen. Thanks for the comment. I think as well, we will reach out to all of our participants today. Oh, I have got also another question from Ellen asking, could you please explain a bit more from a reward point of view?
The reward and recognition kind of scenarios.
Yes.
Okay. There's a lot of issues at the moment with what would be traditional reward and recognition systems, which are very much geared around more transactional type sales approaches. So, how many products do I sell, making commission. And in some cultures, the base salaries that people are on breed this kind of, negativity and anxiousness. And if they're paid more on a certain product than they are on another, and you ask them to be customer centric, there's no way they can, because if they're behind sales, you'll just get what's going to make them the most money. So you've really got to look at what are we encouraging behaviorally in our reward and recognition programs. And if people are selling complex solutions, you can't have it on per transaction. It should be based on total sales. And also too, we're now moving to more team-based approach. So you may in fact have team-based sales rewards as well. It all depends how you set it up. But we definitely know that a lot of those transactional type commission only or high commission, low base type remuneration packages are absolutely going on the out, and because they create so many competing priorities. And if we have a look at some of the issues that happened at the Banking Royal Commission, you will actually see that they were very self-serving, the reward systems, and that's also what created a lot of the corruption that went on.
Thanks, Sue. Thank you very much. I think that's it for questions just now at the moment. Of course, we will also reach out to everyone that's registered and participated today as well. And I have another question coming in from Liz. Are you ever asked into businesses by HR professionals, or do you think we miss the point?
Okay, I have had some great relationships with HR professionals, but I will tell you this now, and after being in business myself, I've been in business for over 30 years. I've been running this business for 25 years. I'm afraid that the ones who actually get it, who are business savvy, who really care about that bigger picture thing, they're not very common. And so they often see people like us as threats, because they think but we're not. We understand our subject area. And I just think that HR need to look at the business from a business perspective. And I'm sure many of them do, but you've got to understand the systems that you're operating in. So I'm afraid that the majority, quite a few of the HR people I've met in my time don't understand selling. They understand maybe training, but they don't understand selling. And they don't understand what good salespeople look like in general. There are those that do, but they're not the majority that I have met. I love to work with them because we need HR in there, but I'm afraid we've had a bit of a gap.
Thanks. Thank you, Sue. Any more questions from anyone? Just give it a minute there. I think that might, just a thanks from Liz for that, Sue. Thank you very much.
My pleasure.
And I think that's it. I think that's it. And we're also come up to the hour as well. So I'd imagine people's lunch hour is over. So thank you so much, Sue, for today. That was really excellent. It's really fantastic information as well. Really appreciate your time, and I think we'll certainly reach out to everyone as well with your details and some further information and links, as you said, that we can share with all of the people that registered today.
Brilliant. Look, thank you very much for the opportunity. I hope it was useful, and everyone, I hope you enjoy your new sales careers. Thank you for your time.
Thanks so much, and bye-bye for everyone, and we'll talk again soon. Thank you, Sue.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye. Bye-bye.